Shabbat Shalom, everyone. The Torah portion this week is Reeh, which can be found in Deuteronomy 11:26 through 16:17. Our Haftarah portion is Isaiah 54:11 through 55:3, which is the third consolation. And our Brit Chadashah portion is John 6:35 through 51. To start with, I wanted to address a common piece of apologetics that are presented to counter the Messianic way of thought. Often people who want to argue that the Torah has been done away with will point to Galatians 3:13, which says, "The Messiah redeemed us from the curse pronounced in the Torah by becoming cursed on our behalf, for the Tanakh says everyone who hangs from mistake comes under a curse." Their argument is that this indicates that the law, or the Torah, was a curse, and that by laying down his life for us, Yeshua freed us from having to follow it. However, this is not what the passage says. That interpretation can only come from extrapolation based on certain preconceived notions. If we go back just a few verses, we read at Galatians 3:10, "For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse, for it is written, Cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them." This ties into our Torah portion for this week. In Deuteronomy 11:26-28, we read, "See, I am setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you listen to the mitzvot," which is the commandments, "of Adonai your God, that I am giving you today, and the curse if you do not listen to the mitzvot of Adonai your God, but turn aside from the way I am ordering you today and follow other gods that you have not known." Let us be clear about from what Yeshua set us free. It was not the Torah. We are not permitted to run around and do whatever we want under the banner of grace. That would be akin to children discovering that they can never lose their parents' love and deciding to act like wild animals all the time. Just because dad's not going to kill you doesn't mean you have the right to wreck the house. As God's chosen people, our actions reflect on him, not just on us. I've lost count of the number of times that a person told me they didn't believe in God or had a distaste for religion because of the behaviors of God's people. And when I say that it is important that we follow the Torah, it is important that we follow more than just what we want to follow or what is easy for us. Because when others see that we claim to be obedient to the Lord's word and thus hold to certain moral standards, but that we are lax on other standards in the word, they will see that hypocrisy and rightfully accuse us of cherry picking. Romans 2:17-29 gives us a clear description of people who call themselves God's people, and yet they trespass against God's law and therefore blaspheme God. Where we read, "But if you call yourself a Jew and rest on Torah and boast about God and know his will and give your approval to what is right because you have been instructed from the Torah, and if you have persuaded yourself that you are a guide to the blind, a light in the darkness, an instructor for the spiritually unaware, and a teacher of children, since in the Torah you have the embodiment of knowledge and truth, then you who teach others, don't you teach yourself, preaching thou shalt not thou shalt not steal, do you steal? Saying thou shalt not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? Detesting idols, do you commit idolatrous acts? You who take such pride in Torah, do you, by disobeying the Torah, dishonor God? As it says in the Tanakh, for it is because of you that God's name is blasphemed by the Goyim. For circumcision is indeed of value if you do what the Torah says, but if you are a transgressor of Torah, your circumcision has become uncircumcision. Therefore, if an uncircumcised man keeps the righteous requirements of the Torah, won't his uncircumcision be counted as circumcision? Indeed, the man who is physically uncircumcised but obeys the Torah will stand as a judgment on you who have the Brit Milah and have Torah written out but violate it. For the real Jew is not merely Jewish outwardly. True circumcision is not only the external and physical. On the contrary, the real Jew is one inwardly, and true circumcision is of the heart, spiritual, not literal, so that his praise comes not from other people, but from God. Yeshua freed us from the curse of the law, from the curse that would befall us for failing to follow the commandments of the Lord. He did this not by removing that curse, but by taking that curse upon himself. As Romans 3:23 tells us, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. This lines up with the Da'at Zakanim, the opinions of the elders, which is a set of rabbinic commentaries on the Torah and what they have to say about our Torah portion. They say that this lower world has both blessings and curses, and that when the Messiah comes to establish his kingdom, he will remove the curses. Through his sacrifice, this is exactly what Yeshua has done. And I want to be clear that he did not do this merely at 33 AD or 38 AD by my reckoning, if you heard my teaching about Daniel chapter 9 and the calculations that can be made from that. Revelation 13:8 says that the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the earth. Yeshua's sacrifice set us free from the condemnation of sin long before any of us were born. It was always the plan, and it was always his atoning for us that set us free from bondage to sin. When the Malach Adonai, the angel of the Lord, appeared to Abraham, Isaac, Rachel, Jacob, Moses, Joshua, and the other heroes and prophets, and when the Malach Adonai, as the true high priest, appeared in the tabernacle and the temple, he had already made the atonement for us. And the resurrection is where he showed us that it didn't mean the end of our relationship, because even after taking the worst that humanity had to offer, he still came back to us. And I want us to take a moment to appreciate the miraculous compassion of that. The Malach Adonai, the Lord's right hand, his son and representative, descended from heaven to live among us as Yeshua of Nazareth, our Messiah. And while he was here, he endured scorn, loneliness, frustration, betrayal, torture, and an excruciating death. In fact, that's literally where the term excruciating comes from, of the cross. At the end of all that, he chose not only to rise from the dead, but to walk among us again. And he continues to endure everything we do to ourselves and each other. For as he says, what you have done to the least of these, you have also done unto me. Every moment of human suffering he experiences with us. Enduring all that, this was his ultimate statement to all existence about us. Yes, they are worth every second of it. This atonement on our behalf, it does not mean that disobeying the Lord's commandments will never lead to a negative outcome. First of all, we must understand that Adonai's commandments are meant to keep us safe. They are like traffic laws that keep us from crashing into each other. If you run a red light, you might get into an accident. Second of all, the Lord chastises and corrects us. He disciplines us so that we might do better. As Hebrews 12:6 says, "For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives." Proverbs 3:12 says, "For whom the Lord loves, he reproves, even as a father corrects the son in whom he delights." Psalm 119:75 says, "I know, O Lord, that your judgments are righteous, and that in faithfulness you have afflicted me." And Revelation 3:19 says, "Those whom I love I reprove and discipline. Therefore be zealous and repent." Therefore, if we do not wish to endure the Lord's reproof, it behooves us to follow his law, his Torah. We cannot cause him to stop loving us through our shortcomings. Yet, if we want to learn the lessons he teaches us, we need to heed his commandments. The commandments he laid before us at Sinai and in the wilderness will be continued in the temple to come. Isaiah 2:2-3 says, "In the last days the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, 'Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths.' The law, Torah, will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Ezekiel 44:24 says, "And in controversy they shall stand in judgment, and they shall judge it according to my judgments, and they shall keep my laws and my statutes and all mine assemblies, and they shall hallow my Sabbaths." Thus we must be careful to obey his commandments, as our Torah portion says. But let us be clear about what the word obey means in this passage when it says to obey his commandments. When the Torah here speaks of blessings if we obey, but curses if we do not obey, the word is tishama'u, the root word of which is Shema. All of you who were present during the liturgy said the word Shema today. Obey, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? No, it's hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Therefore, this passage is not merely God telling us to obey him. It is him telling us to listen to him. Think of when parents try to tell their kids to listen to them. Yes, there is an expectation of obedience, but more importantly, there is an expectation that their children will learn from them. There's an expectation that if a parent tells their child, you cannot go to that party because it will clearly be out of control, then when that child grows older and has an opportunity to attend a party without having to specifically ask for permission, that the child will have learned that parties can get out of control, and those kinds of parties are not the place they want to be. Bless you. Thus, it must be understood that we listen to the Lord's commandments not merely to follow them to the letter, but to understand the spirit of them. We are to internalize them and make them a part of us. Yeshua's story of the Good Samaritan, which we find in Luke 10:30-37, illustrates well the importance of understanding the Lord's commandments beyond merely the letter. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him naked and beat him up, then went off, leaving him half dead. By coincidence, a Cohen was going down on that road, but when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite who reached the place and saw him also passed by on the other side. But a man from Shomron, a Samaritan, who was traveling, came upon him, and when he saw him, he was moved with compassion. So he went up to him, put oil and wine on his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he set him on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 days' wages, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, "Look after him, and if you spend more than this, I'll pay you back when I return." Of these three, which one seems to you to have become the neighbor of the man who fell among the robbers? He answered, "The one who showed mercy toward him." Yeshua said to him, "You go and do as he did." Have you ever wondered why the priest and the Levite in this story keep walking when they see a man dying by the side of the road? Was it merely because they were so callous that they didn't care about the stranger lying there? Well, consider that the man who was beaten was on the road between Jericho and Jerusalem, between Jericho and Jerusalem. So when the priest and the Levite came along the path, it seems a fair assumption that they were on their way to the temple. One cannot perform services at the temple if one is made unclean by touching blood or a dead body. So these men of the temple kept the cleanliness laws, knowing that they had a holy work to fulfill. If the man was dead, that would have made them unclean for 7 days. And even if he wasn't dead, I'm sure he was bleeding, and the blood would have made them unclean. But what work is more holy than helping another person in need? Simply put, there is none. The Samaritan, in the meantime, was considered unclean from birth. He could not enter the temple, no matter how many times he washed in a mikvah. So he had nothing preventing him from helping the wounded stranger. This is a clear example of people blindly obeying the bare words of the Torah rather than giving to the heart of what it means. This is the other two men that kept walking. They were obeying without listening. Because if they listened, they would have understood that before their duties as priests or Levites, before any duties to the temple, came their duties as men, as human beings, as neighbors. Yes, great harm can come from obeying without listening, as we so often fail to understand if we blindly obey. Often we may find ourselves exasperated with our young people because despite how often and how well we teach them about the Lord's ways, they often refuse to follow them. But Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." It is not our responsibility to make them obey. It is our responsibility to help them understand. And some of that understanding might well come from them having to experience what life in disobedience to the Lord's commandments is like. They might have to learn from firsthand experience that the reason the Lord commands us to work most days of the week is so that we can provide for ourselves and our families in a way that laziness does not allow for. And they might well have to learn that from firsthand experience that part of the reason the Lord tells us to rest on the Sabbath is because if we don't, we'll exhaust ourselves. It is all too easy to become a workaholic and work so much that you shorten your life. The Lord is our instructor, and sometimes he allows us to fall into the folly of our own ways so that we may learn why we don't do those things. Sometimes he tells us that the stove is hot, and then he'll let us touch it so that we will know to heed his words next time. And moving on in our Torah portion, we come to a passage that can be troubling if we misinterpret it. Starting at Deuteronomy 12:1, we read, "These are the statutes and rules that you shall be careful to do in the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess, all the days that you live on the earth. You shall surely destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess served their gods. on the high mountains and on the hills and under every green tree. You shall tear down their altars and dash in pieces their pillars and burn their asherim with fire. You shall chop down the carved images of their gods and destroy their name out of that place. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, but you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. There you shall go, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and the contribution that you present, your vow offerings, your free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herd and of your flock. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your households, in all that you undertake, in which the Lord your God has blessed you. So let's clarify just a few things about this passage. First, let us understand that these commandments are for a specific time and place. How do we know? Because the Lord specifies that these commandments are to be fulfilled when we live in the land of the nations that we dispossess. We, as American Messianic Jews, do not live in the Promised Land, and the current Israeli authorities will not allow us to make Aliyah on the basis of our faith because they generally do not accept us as fellow Jews. So how can we keep these commandments? Are we to go destroy mosques and Buddhist temples here in America? Are we to find places where neo-pagans congregate in our area and destroy their meeting places? Are we to destroy the Shrine of the Sun or that Buddhist facility in Falcon? No, we live in America, not the Promised Land. It is not our place to destroy other people's places of worship, no matter how misguided their worship may be. To know how to live in America as believers in the Bible, we need to understand that America is akin to Babylon, not akin to the Promised Land. And we need to look at the examples of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel for examples of how to live in this land. Daniel and his friends did not go around destroying idols and rebelling against unjust kings. Instead, they worked toward the betterment of Babylon. But when the authorities of Babylon demanded that they worship Babylon's gods, they refused, even to the point of death, and thankfully they were saved from that execution. That is our example to follow as citizens of America. America has religious freedom, and I believe it is the mission of all Messianics in America to show the fruit of the Spirit. That way, folks who have the opportunities to follow other faiths will see what we have and want our God. In that way, we will destroy the places dedicated to their false gods. For if we truly follow the Torah and the Messiah's way, then they will see it and long for the relationship that we have with our God and turn away from false gods. May the temples to false gods in this country be left empty and hollow to decay from time and the elements, not because of force of arms, but because of goodness of spirit of those who follow Adonai. I have often heard people speak of sugarcoating the truth to be a terrible thing, but I think that deserves a little bit of examination. Scripture often tells us to produce fruit. But what is fruit? What is an apple, an orange, or a cherry? Fruit's purpose is most obvious with a pomegranate. Fruit is the nutritious sweetness that surrounds the plant's seeds to ensure that those seeds will be spread and planted. So when we consider the term sugarcoating, we need to consider what sort of sugar we're talking about. Is it candy, which has no value other than being sweet, and only then for a few moments, and obscures the truth so it can't even be found anymore? Or is it fruit, which provides nourishment as well as enjoyment? When we explain our faith to those who have questions, let us always provide fruit, not candy. What we must be wary of is candy coating, for candy is sweetness that has no value beyond its flavor and often does harm to one's teeth, one's very ability to take in nourishment, to take in the truth. Now, moving on in the Torah portion, we come to Deuteronomy 12:8, which says, "You shall not do according to all that we are doing here today, everyone doing whatever is right in his own eyes." When I first read this, I thought it meant that the children of Israel were each behaving according to their own consciences. I thought this was a reference to a higher form of law than merely one's conscience. Because while the conscience is important to listen to, it can also be fooled. When I was younger and living according to whatever I thought was right, I found that I could rationalize just about anything and justify any course of action that I wanted to take. I could make it seem righteous in my own mind. I could trick my conscience. And since I often have an overactive sense of guilt anyway. I was able to dismiss any guilt I had as just, oh, that's just your self-esteem acting up horribly again. But the Scripture helps correct us and keep us on a better path. The Word of God helps ensure that we do not merely rely on our own consciences to determine what is right and wrong. And for those of us with an overactive sense of guilt and self-blame, this can be rather freeing. For when we feel guilty over something and we're not sure if we did right or wrong, we can ask ourselves, what commandment have you broken? Or what commandment have you failed to keep? If we can find the one we broke or failed to keep, then we can repent of that and we can strive to do better next time. If we can't find the commandment we broke, then we can know that that guilt is likely misplaced. While this is a powerful lesson and something important to learn, Talmudic commentaries say that this verse means something quite a bit different. Rabbeinu Bahia, a 13th century rabbi, wrote, "This verse addresses the problem of private altars, which during the transitional 14 years of conquest and distribution of the land were still permitted as sites from which to present offerings, something which had been forbidden while the people were in the desert, seeing the tabernacle was right in their midst, and there was no need to travel in order to offer sacrifices in it." Rashi's commentary supports this interpretation. Rabbi Hezekiah ben Manoah, a 16th century rabbi who wrote the book of commentaries called the Kizkuni, came to the same conclusion. Furthermore, Deuteronomy 12:13-14, a few verses later, supports it as it says, "Take care that you do not offer your burnt offerings at any place that you see, but at the place that the Lord will choose in one of your tribes. There you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I am commanding you." This is why we do not make animal sacrifices today, because we are specifically forbidden to do so outside of the place where the Lord makes his glory reside. Consider that most of the sacrifices made in the temple were by choice rather than compulsory. They certainly weren't all sin offerings. Often they were expressions of gratitude for the bounty the Lord had given our people. What this seems to indicate is that when the Lord establishes the children of Israel in their land, no longer are they to do what they think is right in secret. No longer will you do what's right where only you can see it. We are called to do what is right in front of others who worship our same God. When we do that, they can learn from us and we can learn from them. And together we can come to a greater understanding of what is right. Sacrifices are not to be made in secret, private altars. They are to be made in the open so that all will know what you offer to the Lord, and they are to be at his appointed place. I know this seems to fly in the face of something Yeshua once said, for in Matthew 6:1-4 we read, "Take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do a charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory from men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, that your charitable deed may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will himself reward you openly." How do we reconcile this with the idea that we are not to do good for the Lord in secret? Well, let us be clear, first of all, what Yeshua is talking about here. The specific imagery he invokes is of a person who makes a grand announcement every time he does something charitable. Imagine if you were one of the richest people in the country and you decided to give several $1 million to charity. Imagine that then you called a press conference to talk about how much you gave. Or more simply, imagine that a friend needed $20 and you gave it to them, then you bragged to everyone about how generous you were because you gave a friend $20. Yeshua tells us here that the praise of men will be the extent of the reward for such actions. However, this must not be understood to mean that any good deed we do, we must seek to hide from the public eye. In Matthew 5:14-16, the Messiah taught, "You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven." A lot of people in our world struggle with cynicism. They look at the world and think, everyone is wicked. All people look out for themselves first and foremost, and even good deeds are only done to seek personal gain in some roundabout way. If we struggle too hard to hide the good deeds we do, then we conceal those deeds from their eyes. Let us not be braggarts about our deeds, but neither let us be so quick to hide them away. Let's give people a reason to believe that goodness exists, and therefore put their trust in God. Because if you really talk to someone who doesn't believe in God for long enough, eventually you'll find that at the core of it all is an inability to believe in true goodness. The more goodness we can show, the less reason they will have to doubt, because they will see God in us. But at the same time, we cannot make a show of our goodness, because that taints the goodness with selfishness and pride. There's a delicate balance to be found. Now, moving on in the Torah portion, we find a warning against false prophets. This passage partially defines a false prophet as someone who leads people away from the way that the Lord commanded our people to walk. Thus, we cannot interpret the teachings of Yeshua to mean that he taught us that the Torah was done away with, as we don't have to follow it anymore. If Yeshua taught that God's commandments had been overturned, he would be, by the definition provided in this passage, a false prophet. Thus, we can better understand what he means when he says at Matthew 5:17-18, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law, till all is fulfilled." Through this, we see that Yeshua was not teaching against the Torah and what has come to be called the Old Testament. He was offering a better way to understand the law of Adonai's kingdom. Now, going further in the Torah portion, we find Deuteronomy 14:1, where it says, "You are the sons of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves or make any baldness on your foreheads or for the dead." Now, there are many who interpret this passage to mean do not get tattoos. While if you want to be perceived as Jewish, I would certainly recommend against tattoos. Nonetheless, I don't think I can find good support for that particular interpretation of this passage. I looked into the rabbinic commentaries on this, and what I found was fascinating. Rabbi Hezekiah ben Manoah, whom I spoke about earlier, wrote in the Kizkuni that we should understand this passage to mean, "It is just because you are children of mine that you must understand that the death of a family member, whenever and wherever, is not an unmitigated disaster, though it appears to affect you as such. But that I, in this case speaking for the Lord, in my greater wisdom, have decided that the deceased's place in the universe was no longer on earth for his own greater benefit. And even if your father died, you are not as bereaved as would be one of the Gentiles who lost his father, as you have a Father in heaven who will never die." In the Zechariah, which again I spoke about earlier, it is written, "If we are perceived as children of God, when any Jew dies, the surviving children are not really orphans, as God never dies, and therefore mourning rites have to take that into consideration. This is why certain mourning rites spelled out in this paragraph as being practiced by the Gentiles are not appropriate for Jews." Rabbi Abraham ben Meir ibn Ezra, an 11th century rabbi, said, "The meaning of children is now that you know that you are children of God and that the Lord loves you more than a father loves his son. Do not cut yourselves over anything that God does, for whatever the Lord does is for the good. If you do not understand God, then act like small children who do not understand what their father does, but nevertheless rely upon him." Here's what I understand from this passage and the commentaries on it. While we are to mourn our dead, we cannot let our mourning become all-consuming. We cannot let it turn into self-harm. This is why when we do the Mourner's Kaddish, which we will do later this very service, you may notice that it doesn't say anything about death. Furthermore, most of the Mourner's Kaddish is about the faithfulness and the glory of God. Most of the words spoken in our Mourner's Kaddish praise the Lord for being so good. And that must be something that we apply to other places in our lives that hurt us. When we suffer loss, we are not to harm ourselves as an expression of grief. Your flesh is not your own. Do no harm to it. Instead, we must trust that the Lord has something planned that will benefit us. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. That's Deuteronomy 14:2. In the passage that follows, we come once again to the dietary laws. Of the animals on the land, we are told that we may eat every animal that parts the hoof and has the hoof cloven in two, and choose the cud among the animals. That's Deuteronomy 14:6. Then regarding fish or creatures of the water, we are told, of all that are in the waters you may eat these. Whatever has fins and scales you may eat. Of the birds, we are told, these are the ones that you shall not eat: the eagle, the bearded vulture, the black vulture, the kite, the falcon of any kind, every raven of any kind, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any kind, the little owl, and the short-eared owl, the barn owl, the tawny owl, the carrion vulture, and the cormorant, the stork, the heron of any kind, and the hoopoe and the bat. What's funny about this particular list is that it leaves it fairly open to eat a large variety of birds if we should choose so. There's a fairly limited list of what birds we may eat. And finally, we are told that we may not eat that which died of natural causes. I think this one goes without saying, as an animal that died of its own accord is likely diseased and therefore should not be consumed by people. The passage then goes on to talk about tithing. As I've said before in several other drashes, honestly, I hate talking about money. Honestly, I don't even like thinking about money. I wish it wasn't a thing. But the thing is, money exists because of an idea that there is not enough in our society for everyone, which is sometimes true and sometimes not. But it becomes far less true when people follow the Lord and trust in his provision rather than on their own strength and resources. However, we must understand that when the Torah speaks of tithing, it isn't just talking about money. In fact, money isn't even the primary thing it's talking about. At Deuteronomy 14:22 through 23, we read, "You shall tithe all the yield of your seed that comes from the field year by year. And before the Lord your God, in the place that he will choose to make his name dwell there, you shall eat the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, and the firstborn of your herd and flock, and that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always." Food, wine, oil, and livestock. That's what the passage on tithes speaks of first. The Lord here calls upon his people to contribute a tenth of what they produce to the temple. And then he says, "You shall eat the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil." This tithe isn't just to be given to the temple to be consumed as part of the temple service. It is to be shared and enjoyed by the very people who brought in their tithes. They are to enjoy food and drink together and know that if they look out for one another, there is an abundance. Consider that before giving this commandment, the Lord has already told his people that if they follow his other commandments, he will make their fields plentiful and ensure that rains come in their right season. The Lord provides for all of them as individuals and as families, and then encourages them to take care of each other as a community. When we do that, we don't have to fear scarcity anymore. More than being about tithing, I think there is a greater principle about charity to be found in this Torah portion. The commandments at Deuteronomy 12:19, the commandment at Deuteronomy 12:19 is, "Take care that you do not neglect the Levite as long as you live in your land." And that carries with it the idea that those with soil are to look after those who do not have soil. While one could be tempted to think it means while you are in the promised land, the word translated to land there is not eretz, which is the word that is used to describe the promised land. Rather, the word is Haadama, meaning the soil or the ground, and it is the same word used to describe the soil from which Adam was created. This speaks to the greater biblical idea that those who have are to take care of those who do not have, that those with an inheritance are to look after those without inheritance. This interpretation is reinforced at Deuteronomy 14:27 through 29, where it emphasizes the importance of looking after Levites who have no inheritance, and 15:7 through 11, which lumps Levites with widows and the fatherless as people in need of charity for their living. Under the Father's model of charity in the economy of Adonai's kingdom, poverty is abolished. We may always have the poor, yes, in that some do not possess anything for their own, but those people are taken care of by others. Because of passages like this, some have argued that the biblical way is oddly similar to communism, because it speaks of a community where everyone takes care of everyone's needs. And I'm here to tell you with a certainty that this interpretation is absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. First of all, communism by its nature strives to abolish all religious practices and establish the secular authorities as the highest authorities. This is why communism has produced so many dictators, because it puts its rulers in the place of God and makes them into living idols. And certainly we can see the extreme extent of this with the myth building that surrounds Kim Jong-un and his family. Second, communism is the idea of forcing people at the point of a weapon to give up their abundance, and therefore the government gets to take care of others. However, when God gives this commandment for tithes, he does not speak of any negative consequences for failing to give them. There are consequences for breaking so many other commandments, such as the death penalty for murder and adultery, or repayment for injuries caused, but no penalty. You can't find a penalty in there for failing to bring in tithes. I believe this is because the Lord knows that when charity becomes a compulsion, it creates resentment from both the person giving and the person receiving. When Robin Hood steals from the rich to feed the poor, this inflames the hatred between the rich and the poor. And I know Robin Hood's not real, I'm just using him as an illustration here. The rich hate the poor because they were robbed on the poor's behalf. And the poor hate the rich because they had to be robbed for the poor to receive charity and to be able to eat. The Robin Hood system benefits Robin Hood more than any other person. The Lord wants us to take care of each other for love's sake, not because we were forced, and he doesn't want you to go stealing other people's money to do it. The Lord's economy is not communistic, and honestly, neither is it capitalistic. The Lord's economy is so far above any of our mortal ideas of what an economy ought to be, because human economies are built around that concept of scarcity. Scarcity is an aspect of the dominion of darkness, which so often lords its power over this material world. There is no scarcity in Adonai's kingdom. And if we could find a way to conform our society to fit his model, we'd all be the better for it. These days, there's a lot of talk of different forms of apocalypses around the corner. We have, of course, financial apocalypses people are talking about, but then the ongoing conflict in Israel and in the Middle East at large has definitely fueled the end times theorists. There are also people predicting a possible economic collapse in the near future. News outlets more and more speak of the possibility that aliens have visited the Earth from other planets and may be doing so with a higher frequency. And with all this in mind, let us not give in to fear. Let us instead trust that let's trust in the Lord and know that it's possible that a time may soon come when we must lead a rescued remnant to follow his ways. We may yet see an economic collapse, and while there would surely be much suffering from such a situation, what a beautiful opportunity that could be to try to implement the Lord's economy. We might see our country's government collapse, and many would suffer from that loss as well. But if it were to happen, what a beautiful opportunity it could be to lead the people away from the laws of man and to the Torah of God. I spoke earlier about how the Lord says not to cut ourselves to mourn the dead, and that's because the Lord knows what's best and will take care of us. That is true even when the world seems to collapse around us. That's when it will be the hardest to keep our faith in him, but it's also when we will most need our faith in him. No matter how terrifying things look, we may we remember what the Lord said in his word. In our Haftarah portion this week, we read, O afflicted one, storm-tossed and not comforted, behold, I will set your stones in antimony. I will lay your foundations with sapphires. I will make your pinnacles of agate, your gates of carbuncles, and all your walls of precious stones. And all your children shall be taught by the Lord, and great shall be the peace of your children. That's Isaiah 54:11-13. In Isaiah 54:15, we read, If anyone stirs up strife, it is not from me. Whoever stirs up strife with you shall fall because of you. I mentioned before that I do not like talking or even thinking about money, so I'm sure you can imagine my joy when I read Isaiah 55:1, where it says, Come, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters, and he who has no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without price. In our Brit Hadashah portion today, Yeshua told his disciples, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst. That's John 6:35. When we find ourselves fearing what we might eat, drink, or wear the next day, let us remember that the Lord has promised nourishment to those who follow his word. And when we find ourselves fearing the people in power in this world, or the spirits that influence the powers of this world, let us take comfort in the might of our Lord. As it says in Psalm 97, the Lord reigns, let the earth rejoice, let the multitudes of isles be glad. Clouds and darkness surround him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. A fire goes before him and burns up his enemies round about. His lightnings light the world. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the Lord of the whole earth. The heavens declare his righteousness, and all the peoples see his glory. He preserves the souls of his saints. He delivers them out of the hand of the wicked. And I want to finish with a little talk about one more subject in the parasha. In the Torah portion, Reeh, we get another prohibition against worshiping idols or false gods. In the same section, Adonai forbids building private altars or offering up animals as sacrifices at any places other than his dwelling place where he puts his name. But he does make sure to tell us that we can still eat meat. Now, there is a connection here between these ideas. Idolatry is an attempt to own whatever god you're praying to. Whether one had an idol in one's home, household gods, as the Bible sometimes says, or if some temple, like, say, the big Egyptian temples, owned the idol. In any event, it was an attempt to take ownership and derive benefit from the deity that idol represented. And polytheism, by its nature, encourages a quid pro quo relationship with the divine, where we worship not out of reverence, but out of a desire to make things happen for us. Idolatry and polytheism are attempts to put ourselves in control of the world around us in ways that Adonai has not granted us control. While none of us may be tempted to buy idols or to worship many gods or even build altars in our own backyards or, have a grill and say, this is my altar, and start making offerings on it. Now, don't do that, by the way. We may find ourselves tempted, nonetheless, to have a quid pro quo relationship with Adonai, where we worship him in hopes of getting him to do as we wish. Or we may be tempted to try to own Adonai, to make him our own, and sometimes even to wield him like a weapon against those who stand in the way of what we want. This Torah portion specifically forbids that kind of thinking, because the Lord doesn't want a relationship with us that's based on fear. He doesn't want a relationship with us that's based on personal gain. He certainly doesn't want us to wield him against our fellow human beings. He is not ours to own. The worship of Adonai is a surrender to him, an agreement to worship him on his terms. Unlike the pagan gods, he is not some business partner with whom we have to be careful what sort of deal we make. Unlike the deities of polytheistic societies, Adonai is not some cosmic politician who can be bribed on our behalf and who will give his favor to the highest bidder. Quite simply put, he is the Father, and we are his children. He looks after our well-being in ways that we cannot completely fathom. He knows what is best for us, for all of us, and worshiping him means that we do not try to take ownership of him, because we'd much rather accept his ownership over us. Shabbat Shalom.